My husband forbade me from buying diapers for our newborn twins at the store because he had only wanted one child, but that evening I set a trap for him that erased his smug grin. My husband, Carl, and I had decided early on that I would leave my job after the baby arrived. As my pregnancy progressed, we discovered I was carrying twin girls, and my happiness was beyond words. Carl appeared pleased to. After our daughters were born, Carl's attitude shifted. I was left to look after the newborns by myself, as he rarely offered any assistance. Recently, when I asked for money to purchase bottles, he gritted his teeth and said, "My God, you need another bottle. I told you to save money and stop wasting it on useless stuff." That reaction was odd coming from him. Carl had a good income, and I only bought what was necessary for our girls. I thought perhaps the pressure of new fatherhood was affecting him. A few days ago, we went grocery shopping with the whole family. I pushed the cart while Carl walked next to me, mostly distracted by his phone. He told me to pick out everything myself since he was busy with work. So I did. At checkout, the cashier tallied everything and announced, "Your total is $121.77. Carl only needed to pay with his card. Instead, looking at the scanned items, his face flushed. He grabbed a pack of diapers and asked the cashier to remove them from the purchase. I looked at him, insisting the diapers were essential. His reply was sharp. "No, I'm tired of paying for all of this." I felt deeply embarrassed standing there. That night, I tried to discuss the issue with him. I wondered if he faced job difficulties. Carl told me, "What did you expect? I wanted one child, not two. I'm tired of spending money on two children. It's time for you to go back to work, and we'll split all our expenses 50-50. I was shocked hearing that from my husband. I refused to let the matter drop. I smiled and responded, "You're right. I agree to go back to work, but I have one condition. You won't believe what happened next." "A condition," Carl scoffed, his eyes glued to the glowing screen of his smartphone as he lounged on the sofa. He didn't even bother to look up at me, treating my ultimatum like a minor inconvenience, rather than a life-altering conversation. "Of course you have a condition. You women always need to complicate things." "Fine. What is it? Make it quick. I have an important email to finish." I stood by the kitchen island, taking a slow, deep breath to steady the storm of fury and betrayal brewing inside my chest. Just a few months ago, this man had held my hand in the delivery room, whispering about our bright future. Now he sat before me like an indifferent stranger who viewed his own flesh and blood as line items on a corporate spreadsheet. "My condition is simple," I said, my voice eerily calm, devoid of the tremor I felt tearing through my muscles. "Since we are going to split everything strictly 50-50, and since you made it abundantly clear you only wanted one child while I wanted two, we divide our responsibilities mathematically." Carl finally lowered his phone, a frown furrowing his brow as his analytical brain tried to process my words. "Mathematically? What are you talking about, Clara?" "It's basic division, Carl," I replied, stepping into the dim light of the living room so he could see the cold resolve in my eyes. "To children, to parents, you wanted one child, so you take financial and physical responsibility for baby Amaya. I wanted the other, so I will take financial and physical responsibility for baby Bimia. From this moment on, every single expense, every diaper, every formula tin, every doctor's visit, and every sleepless night will be split right down the middle according to our designated child." For a second, silence hung heavy in the room. Then, a slow, condescending smirk crept onto Carl's face. He let out a dry, dismissive chuckle, shaking his head as if amused by my supposed absurdity. "Are you hearing yourself right now?" Carl laughed, leaning back against the cushions and crossing his arms. "You want to partition our babies like a piece of real estate. That is the most ridiculous, emotional nonsense I've ever heard." "Is it?" I challenged. You're the one who threw a tantrum at the supermarket over a pack of diapers because you refused to pay for extra expenses. You're the one who wants a 50-50th split. Well, congratulations, Carl. You're getting your wish, but it applies to everything. Carl stared at me, searching my expression for a sign of bluffing. Finding none, his smirk faltered slightly, replaced by a flicker of irritation. But arrogance quickly took over again. He was a high-earning financial analyst. He lived and breathed risk management and contract negotiation. To him, a 50-50th split sounded like an easy win, a way to curb what he perceived as my excessive spending. Fine, Carl snapped, waving a dismissive hand. If you want to play childish games, be my guest. Maya is mine, Mia is yours. We split the household rent and utilities down the middle, and you go back to work next month to cover your half of everything. Let's see how long you last before you beg to go back to the old way. It's a deal, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. Let's put it in writing. Carl raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my insistence on formality. But he grabbed a pen and a notepad from the coffee table, without hesitation. With absolute smugness, he drafted a quick, bulleted agreement outlining our new financial and domestic arrangement. Rent split 50-50, groceries split 50-50, and each parent bearing the individual costs of their assigned twin. He signed it with a flourish, sliding it across the table to me. I signed my name right below his, a quiet satisfaction settling deep in my bones. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he had trapped me into submission. He had no idea that the trap was entirely his own. The next morning, the new regime began. Carl woke up bright and early, dressed sharply in his tailored suit, ready for another day at his prestigious corporate firm. As he poured his artisanal coffee, I sat at the kitchen table nursing Mia, while Maya slept peacefully in her bassinet nearby. Don't forget, Carl said smoothly, grabbing his briefcase. My half of the internet bill is due today. Transfer it over by noon. And make sure you buy Maya's specific brand of formula today out of your budget. Of course, consider it done, I replied, offering him a sweet, innocent smile. Carl grinned, clearly riding high on the illusion of control. He kissed the top of Maya's head, completely ignoring Mia, true to his cruel mental division, and walked out the front door, whistling a tune. The moment the front door clicked shut, my demeanor shifted. No more hesitation, no more grief. It was execution time. I immediately pulled out my laptop and phone. For the past 3 days, while Carl had been dismissing me and burying his face in his phone, I had been quietly laying the groundwork for this exact moment. First, I accessed our joint bank account, the one Carl routinely monitored to control our household cash flow. Because we were married in a jurisdiction with community property laws, and because every single penny of his salary had been deposited into this account. During our marriage, legally, half of everything belonged to me. More importantly, I knew every single password, security PIN, and account detail for his personal investments, his hidden cryptocurrency wallet, and his separate savings accounts. Carl was meticulous about numbers, but he was entirely arrogant about security, assuming I was too financially illiterate to ever look beneath the surface. I spent the next 2 hours systematically executing phase 1 of the trap. Using legal precedents and financial tracking apps I had secretly set up, one transferred exactly 50% of our liquid joint savings into a private account held solely in my name. Next, I contacted the family lawyer whose consultation I had quietly booked 2 days prior. I forwarded him the signed custody and expense sharing agreement Carl had drafted the night before, a document that, in the eyes of family law, served as an admission of intentional financial abandonment, discrimination between children, and bad faith marital conduct. The lawyer's response was immediate and ecstatic. Clara, this document is a goldmine. Proceed with the asset freeze and file immediately. By afternoon, I moved on to phase 2, the physical household audit. True to our separate budgets agreement, I packed up all of Carl's personal items that I had paid for, from his luxury skincare products to the specialty groceries in the pantry that I had purchased with my own prior savings, and moved them to a designated Carl only shelf in the garage. When it came to the twins, I strictly separated their supplies. Maya's diapers, Maya's clothes, Maya's wipesol purchased using funds I siphoned directly from Carl's personal credit card via an authorized user account he had completely forgotten he left open for emergencies. Meanwhile, Mia's supplies were bought using my own independent funds. By 5 p.m., everything was meticulously in place. The house was spotless, the twins were fed and resting, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping chamomile tea, waiting for the clock to strike 6:30 p.m., the exact time Carl usually returned from work. At precisely 6:32 p.m., the front door unlocked. Carl walked in, loosening his silk tie with an exhausted sigh, but his face wore a smug, triumphant grin. He had clearly spent the day gloating over his perceived victory. "Rough day at the office," Carl announced, tossing his keys onto the counter. "The market is volatile. But hey, at least I don't have to worry about carrying your financial dead weight anymore, right? Did you look at job listings today?" I didn't answer right away. I calmly set my teacup down on its saucer and looked at him. "Welcome home, Carl," I said softly. "You look tired. You must have had a stressful day managing your finances all by yourself." Carl chuckled, walking over to the refrigerator and pulling out a bottle of imported beer. "Stressful? Not at all, Clara. In fact, it's liberating. I checked our joint account this morning, and it feels great knowing my hard-earned cash isn't just evaporating into endless baby supplies." "Ah, yes. About the accounts," I said, standing up and smoothing out my blouse. "I'm glad you brought that up." Carl took a sip of his beer, leaning casually against the kitchen counter. "What about them? Did you manage to transfer your half of the utility bill yet?" "No, Carl, I didn't," I replied evenly. "In fact, I did something much more productive." Carl's smile faltered slightly, his eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" "Remember the agreement we signed last night?" I asked, walking over to the kitchen island and picking up a crisp, printed folder. "You insisted on a strict 50/50ths split. You explicitly stated that you only wanted one child, and that you refused to pay for two, and that every expense must be accounted for down to the last penny." "Yeah, and—" Carl's voice dropped its playful tone, replaced by a sharp edge of rising anxiety. "And so, as a dutiful wife respecting your legally binding written contract, I consulted with a family law attorney today," I said, my voice cutting through the kitchen silence like a razor blade. "I presented him with the document you wrote and signed, outlining your deliberate refusal to support both of our children equally, alongside your demand for financial separation." Carl's beer bottle slipped slightly in his grip, a few drops splashing onto the counter. You went to a lawyer over a domestic argument." "It wasn't an argument, Carl. It was a formal contractual arrangement," I corrected him smoothly. "And because of that contract, combined with your ongoing financial abandonment of Mia, my lawyer and I filed emergency paperwork this afternoon." Before Carl could even process the words, I opened the folder and slid 3 formal legal notices across the marble countertop toward him. Carl's eyes scanned the documents, and the color drained entirely from his face. His jaw went slack, and his eyes bulged in absolute terror. Notice of emergency asset freeze and restraining order. Petition for sole legal and physical custody. Mandatory child support and alimony enforcement order. What is this?" Carl stammered, his voice cracking as he grabbed the papers with shaking hands. "Clara, are you out of your mind? You froze our joint accounts. You filed for sole custody." "I didn't just freeze our joint accounts, Carl," I said, stepping closer, letting every word land with absolute precision. Based on the asset division clauses and the community property laws of our state, I transferred my legal 50% share of our entire liquid savings into an account you cannot touch. Furthermore, because your signed agreement explicitly proves you discriminate between our twin daughters and refuse to provide equal care. My lawyer used it as open and shut evidence of unfit parental conduct and financial abuse. Carl stared at the papers, his smug grin completely erased, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. The color had vanished from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly pale under the kitchen lights. "You can't do this," Carl shouted, his voice pitching high with desperation as the reality of his arrogant trap crashing down on him set in. It was just a fight, a heated conversation. It wasn't a real legal contract. It was handwritten, dated, and signed by your own hand. "Carl," I replied coldly, my gaze unwavering. "In a court of law, a signed declaration of intent carries immense weight. You wanted to split everything 50-50. You wanted to separate our children? Well, congratulations. You got your wish, multiplied by the full force of the family court system." Carl stumbled back, his hip hitting the kitchen island as his knees buckled slightly. He looked down at the papers, then looked at me, realizing the catastrophic scale of his own arrogance. He had tried to weaponize his financial control against me, only to hand me the ultimate weapon to dismantle his entire life. "Clara, please," Carl whispered, his voice trembling as he reached out a desperate hand toward me. "Please, let's talk about this. We can call the lawyer back. We can tear up the paper. Please, don't do this to our family." I stepped back, out of his reach, looking down at him with quiet, unshakable dignity. "The conversation is over, Carl," I said softly. "You wanted one child. Enjoy the peace and quiet of your new budget, because starting tomorrow, you'll be paying maximum child support and legal fees all calculated precisely by the numbers you love so much." Turned around and walked gracefully toward the nursery, leaving Carl standing alone in the kitchen, staring down at the ruined wreckage of his smug little game.